The Corallian research station floated in the darkness like a crystal flower against the dying light of the Ren star. Commander Jelka pressed her translucent hand against the observation window and watched the ancient sun pulse with its final breaths. Her people had studied this star for 3 generations, watching it slowly collapse and die. It was peaceful work, safe work, the kind of science that hurt no one. That peace was about to end. The first sign of trouble came from the long-range sensors. Junior researcher Mel Thee called out from his station, his crystal body flickering with nervous light patterns. "Commander, we have ships dropping out of hyperspace. Multiple contacts. Unknown configuration." Jelka moved to the sensor console, her 6 legs carrying her gracefully across the command center. The Corallians had evolved on a low-gravity world, and their bodies reflected that heritage. They were tall, slender, and beautiful in the way that living crystal could be beautiful. They were also completely helpless. The sensor display showed 12 large ships emerging from the twisted space of hyperspace exit. The vessels were dark and angular, covered in armor plating that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. Jelka had never seen ships like these, but she knew what they were. Every peaceful species in this part of the galaxy had heard the stories. Harvesters. "Send a message to the nearest Federation outpost," Jelka ordered, trying to keep the fear from her voice. "Tell them we have Vec ships in our system." Mel Thee's lights flickered faster. "Commander, the nearest outpost is in the Balani system. That's 3 weeks away at maximum hyperspace velocity." 3 weeks. Jelka looked back at the sensor display. The harvester ships were already moving toward the research station. They would be here in hours, not weeks. The Vec Empire had been spreading across the outer rim for decades. They took entire populations, loaded them into cargo ships like livestock, and transported them to factory worlds where they worked until they died. The Vec didn't negotiate. They didn't show mercy. They simply took what they wanted and moved on to the next target. "Send the message anyway," Jelka said, "and begin evacuation procedures." But even as she gave the order, she knew it was hopeless. The research station had only 3 small transport ships, and they could barely carry 50 Corallians each. There were over 2,000 people on the station. Most would have to stay behind. The next few hours passed like a nightmare. The evacuation ships launched, carrying the youngest researchers and the most critical data cores. Jelka watched them disappear into hyperspace, knowing she would never see them again. She had chosen to stay with the station, along with most of the senior staff. Someone had to be here to try to protect the people who couldn't escape. The harvester ships moved into position around the station, like predators surrounding wounded prey. They were massive vessels, each one larger than the entire research station. Their hulls bristled with weapons and boarding equipment. Jelka could see smaller ships moving between them like insects around a corpse. "Incoming transmission," Mel Thee announced. The main screen flickered to life, showing the command bridge of the lead harvester ship. The creature that appeared was nightmare-made flesh. The Vec captain stood nearly 3 meters tall, his body covered in black chitin armor that gleamed under the harsh lights. 4 arms ended in clawed hands, and his head was a horror of compound eyes and clicking mandibles. When he spoke, the translation system turned his clicking and chittering into words that froze Jelka's blood. "Crystal beings of the research station, you will prepare for harvest. Resistance is futile. Cooperation will result in better treatment during processing." Jelka stepped forward, her body glowing with the pale light that indicated formal communication among her people. "We are researchers, scientists. We have done nothing to harm your people or your empire. Please, we ask for mercy." The Vec captain's compound eyes focused on her with the cold attention of a predator studying prey. Mercy is a weakness. Your people will serve the Empire in the factories of Vec Prime. Your knowledge will be extracted and catalogued. Your bodies will work until they fail. Then they will be recycled for nutrients. This is the way of the harvest. The transmission cut off, leaving the command center in silence. Zelka looked around at her people. They were all watching her, waiting for orders, hoping for some miracle that she knew would never come. But she had to try something, anything. Open all communication channels, she ordered. All frequencies, maximum power. Melfi looked confused. Commander, what message should I send? Zelka moved to the communication console and began recording. She knew that no one would hear this message in time to help them. The nearest military forces were weeks away. But maybe, someday, someone would find this recording. Maybe they would know what happened here. To any vessel or station receiving this transmission, this is Commander Zelka of the Carillion Research Station Bright Star. We are under attack by Vec harvester ships. We have no weapons, no defenses. They will take my people as slaves. We have tried to evacuate, but most of us will not escape. If anyone receives this message, please remember that we existed. Remember that we were here, trying to understand the universe, trying to learn and grow and add something good to the galaxy. We ask for help, though we know none will come. We face the darkness alone, but we face it with the light of knowledge. End transmission. She closed the channel and looked back at the sensor display. The harvester ships were launching boarding pods now, dozens of them, racing toward the station like dark meteors. In minutes, they would punch through the hull and disgorge their cargo of Vec warriors. Zelka gathered her people in the central laboratory, the heart of their research station. If they were going to be taken, at least they would face it together. The Carillions formed circles, holding hands, and singing the old songs of their homeworld. Their bodies glowed with soft, harmonic light, creating patterns of beauty that would soon be extinguished forever. The first boarding pods hit the station with impacts that shook the entire structure. Emergency lights flashed, and atmosphere alarms began to sound. Zelka heard the screech and hiss of cutting tools as the Vec burned their way through the hull. Soon, very soon, it would all be over. She only hoped that somewhere in the galaxy, someone was listening. The Vec came through the walls like death itself. The first breach occurred in Laboratory Section 7. Zelka heard the explosive decompression from 3 levels away, followed by the terrible sound of Vec war cries echoing through the corridors. The screaming started moments later. The boarding pods had punched through the research station's hull in a dozen places, each one disgorging 20 or 30 Vec warriors. These were not the elite soldiers of the Vec military, but harvest troops trained specifically for capturing and processing civilian populations. They moved through the station with practiced efficiency, herding the Carillions toward collection points, like farmers gathering livestock. Zelka tried to organize some kind of resistance, but her people had no weapons and no training for combat. The Carillions were scientists, researchers, philosophers. They had spent centuries studying the universe through telescopes and sensors, not through the sights of weapons. When the first Vec warrior rounded the corner of the main laboratory, clicking and chittering in their harsh language, the Carillions could only back away in terror. The creature was even more horrible up close. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, its black chitin armor scarred and pitted from countless battles. 4 arms ended in clawed hands that could tear through metal, and its head was a nightmare of compound eyes and snapping mandibles. When it spoke, the translator rendered its words in a voice like grinding stone. Crystal beings, you will form lines. You will move to the processing area. Resistance will result in damage to your bodies, which will reduce your work efficiency and shorten your useful lifespan. Some of the younger Carillions began to panic. their crystalline bodies flashing with bright, chaotic patterns of light. The Vec warrior raised one of its plasma rifles and fired a warning shot into the ceiling. Molten metal rained down, and the Corallians fell silent. Movement, now. They moved. Jelka found herself swept along with the crowd, her people flowing around her like a stream of living light. The Vec herded them through corridors that had once been places of learning and discovery, past laboratories where they had spent their lives trying to understand the mysteries of the universe. Now those same corridors had become pathways to slavery. The main cargo bay had been converted into a processing center. Vec technicians had set up scanning equipment and sorting stations. As each Corallian was forced through the scanners, machines analyzed their body structure, their health, their likely work capacity. Those deemed suitable for heavy labor were marked with one kind of tag. Those better suited for delicate assembly work received another. The very young and the very old were tagged for immediate processing into raw nutrients. Jelka watched in horror as her people were sorted like cargo. She saw her friend Kelmar, an elderly astronomer who had devoted his life to mapping stellar formations, marked for nutrient processing. She saw young Thenel, a brilliant physicist barely past her first molting, tagged for factory work. The Vec saw them not as people with dreams and families and contributions to make to the galaxy, but as resources to be consumed. The processing captain was a particularly large Vec named Morth, according to the rank insignia burned into his chiton. He supervised the operation from a raised platform, his forearms constantly moving as he checked reports and gave orders. When Jelka was finally brought before the scanners, he looked down at her with the cold attention of a predator evaluating prey. "Research Station Commander," he said, reading from his scanner display. "High intelligence rating. Suitable for technical analysis work. You will be assigned to the computational centers on Vec Prime." "What will happen to my people?" Jelka asked. Mort's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Your people will serve the Empire until their bodies fail. Then they will be recycled. This is the natural order. The strong consume the weak. The Empire grows stronger, and the universe becomes more efficient. We were not your enemies. We never threatened you. Why do you do this?" "Because we can," Morth replied simply. "Because you are weak, and we are strong. Because the Empire requires workers, and you are available. Your distress signal was quite useful. It told us exactly where to find you." The words hit Jelka like a physical blow. Her distress call, sent in desperate hope that someone might help them, had instead served as a beacon for their destroyers. She had led the Vec directly to her people. The sorting continued for hours. The Corallians were loaded into cargo containers designed for transporting livestock. The containers were cramped and dark, with minimal life support systems. Just enough to keep the cargo alive during transport, nothing more. Zelka found herself in Container 7 with 43 other researchers. They huddled together in the darkness, their natural bioluminescence providing the only light. Some were singing quietly, traditional Corallian songs of mourning. Others simply stared at the metal walls, their lights dim with despair. Young Melthi, who had been working the sensor station when the Vec arrived, crawled over to where Zelka sat against the container wall. "Commander," he whispered, "was there any response to your distress call? Any sign that someone heard us?" Zelka wanted to lie, wanted to give him some hope to carry into slavery. But she had been a scientist too long to abandon truth now. "No," she said quietly. "No one answered. No one will come." Through the thin walls of the container, they could hear the Vec loading more cargo, shouting orders, preparing their ships for departure. The research station would be stripped of everything valuable, then left as a dead hulk orbiting the dying star. In a few hours, they would enter hyperspace, and the journey to the factory worlds would begin. Zelka closed her eyes and tried to remember what her homeworld had looked like. The crystal forests that sang in the wind, the cities of living light that pulsed with the heartbeat of her people. Her children, who had already finished their education and moved to other worlds, other research projects. They would never know what had happened here. They would wait for messages that would never come. The container shuddered as the harvester ship began to move. Through the walls, Zelka could hear the deep rumble of engines powering up. Soon they would leave this system behind, carrying their cargo of broken dreams to whatever fate awaited them in the factory worlds of the Vec Empire. She had sent one last message into the void, hoping against hope that someone would hear. But space was vast and empty, and her people were just one more species to disappear into the darkness. The galaxy was full of predators and prey, and the Corallians had always been prey. In the darkness of the container, surrounded by the quiet despair of her people, Zelka finally understood the truth that every peaceful species eventually learned. No one was coming to save them. The first sign that something had changed came from the harvester ship's sensor officer. "Captain Morth," the technician called out in rapid clicking sounds. "I'm detecting hyperspace distortions. Multiple contacts emerging from jump space." Morth turned from the cargo manifest he had been reviewing. The processing was nearly complete. In another hour, they would jump to hyperspace and begin the journey back to the Empire. The crystal beings had been efficiently sorted and stored. It had been a successful harvest. "Identity of the contacts?" he demanded. The sensor officer's mandibles clicked nervously. "Unknown, sir. The energy signatures don't match anything in our databases. Ship configurations are strange." Morth moved to the sensor display, his forearms working the controls with practiced efficiency. What he saw made his compound eyes widen in surprise. 12 ships had emerged from hyperspace, but not from any of the expected approach vectors. These vessels had come from the galactic void itself, from the empty space between spiral arms, where no civilized species had ever ventured. The ships were sleek and angular, their hulls scarred by recent battle damage. They moved with purpose, forming an attack formation that spoke of military training and combat experience. But that was impossible. Morth checked the tactical display again. The nearest military outpost was 3 weeks away. No rescue fleet could have reached this system in time, even if they had received the crystal being's distress call immediately. Yet here were 12 warships, clearly preparing for combat. "Scan the lead vessel," Morth ordered. "I want to know what species we're dealing with." The sensor return was unlike anything in the Vec databases. The ship's hull was composed of alloys that had never been cataloged. The energy readings showed power systems based on technologies that shouldn't exist. Most disturbing of all, the life signs aboard the ships registered as completely unknown. The communication console chirped with an incoming message. Morth activated the channel, expecting surrender terms or perhaps a demand for negotiations. What he heard instead changed everything. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Force destroyer Indomitable. You are in violation of interstellar law regarding the transport of civilian populations. By the authority of the Sol Alliance, you will cease hostile operations and release your prisoners immediately." The translation matrix struggled with several concepts. The words Earth and Sol had no reference points in any known star charts. More confusing were terms like interstellar law and civilian populations. The Empire recognized no laws except strength, and the concept of civilians was equally foreign to a culture built on conquest and consumption. But it was the tone of the transmission that truly puzzled Morth. The voice was calm, professional, and utterly confident. This Captain Chen spoke as if she held all the advantages. Despite being outnumbered 4-1, and facing ships that could crush her fleet without effort. "Unknown vessels," Morth replied. "You are interfering with a lawful harvest operation. The cargo aboard these ships now belongs to the Vec Empire. Withdraw immediately, or face destruction." The response came back within seconds. "Negative. Those people are under our protection now. You have 60 seconds to power down your weapons and prepare for boarding." Mort's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. These aliens clearly had no understanding of whom they were threatening. The Harvester fleet included 4 heavy cruisers and 8 support vessels, each one armed with enough firepower to sterilize a planet. The unknown ships, while sleek and fast-looking, were clearly outnumbered and outgunned. "You have chosen poorly," Morth transmitted. "Your ships will be harvested along with their crews. The Empire always has need for more workers." That was when the impossible happened. The lead alien ship, the one called Indomitable, opened fire first. Its weapons were unlike anything in the Vec arsenal. Instead of plasma bolts or particle beams, it fired projectiles that moved at a significant fraction of light speed. The rounds struck the shields of the nearest harvester vessel and punched through them like they weren't there. The other alien ships followed suit, spreading out in a complex attack pattern that seemed to defy tactical logic. They flew directly into the formation of harvester ships, weaving between plasma bolts and energy beams with impossible precision. Their weapons fired continuously, each shot placed with surgical accuracy to disable weapon systems and engines, rather than destroying the ships outright. Morth watched his tactical display in growing confusion and alarm. The alien ships moved like nothing he had ever seen. They rolled and twisted through 3-dimensional space, using their engines in ways that should have torn their hulls apart. When one of his cruisers managed to get a targeting lock, the alien ship simply wasn't there anymore, having changed direction so quickly that the sensors couldn't track it. "How are they doing this?" demanded his weapons officer. Morth had no answer. The alien ships fought with a combination of reckless courage and precise calculation that defied everything the Vec understood about warfare. They took risks that should have been suicidal, flying through crossfires that would have destroyed any sane pilot, yet they emerged unscathed, while his own ships suffered damage with each passing moment. But it was more than just their flying skills that confused him. The aliens' targeting patterns made no sense from a military perspective. Instead of focusing their fire on the command ships or the primary weapon systems, they seemed to be specifically targeting the cargo holds where the crystal beings were stored. "Captain," his communications officer reported, "the alien vessels are launching boarding pods. They're heading for our cargo bays." Boarding pods? In the middle of a space battle? Morth's compound eyes tracked the small craft as they raced toward his ships, weaving through defensive fire with the same impossible skill as their parent vessels. The aliens were either completely insane or operating under some tactical doctrine that he couldn't understand. "All ships, prepare to repel boarders," he ordered. "Security teams to the cargo areas. These aliens want our cargo. We'll give them a fight for it." But even as he gave the orders, Morth felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of harvest operations. For the first time since joining the fleet, he wasn't entirely certain that the Empire would win this engagement. The alien ships continued their impossible dance through space, their weapons carving through his fleet's defenses like they were made of paper. And all the while, that calm, professional voice continued to broadcast on all frequencies. "This is Captain Shen. Harvester vessels, you are outmatched. Surrender now and your crews will be treated according to interstellar law. Continue to resist, and we will disable your ships and take your prisoners by force." Interstellar law again. These aliens kept referring to concepts that didn't exist. Laws that applied to everyone. Protection for the weak. Treatment of prisoners. It was as if they came from a completely different universe, one where strength was tempered by mercy and power was limited by principle. Morth looked at his tactical display one more time. 3 of his ships were already dead in space, their engines destroyed and their weapons offline. The aliens had done this without destroying a single vessel, without killing more than a handful of his crew. They fought with a precision and restraint that spoke of advanced training and rigid discipline. Who were these creatures that appeared from nowhere and fought like legends? And why were they willing to die for slaves they had never met? The human boarding pods hit the harvester ships like hammers striking anvils. Jelka heard the impacts from inside her cargo container, each one sending shockwaves through the ship's hull. The Corallians huddled together in the darkness, their bioluminescent bodies flickering with fear and confusion. They had expected to begin the long journey to the slave worlds. Instead, something impossible was happening above their heads. The sounds of battle echoed through the ship's corridors. Plasma weapons firing, metal being torn apart, the harsh clicking of Vec voices shouting orders, and underneath it all, something new. Human voices, speaking in a language that the universal translators struggled to process. Breach Team Alpha, Cargo Hold 7 secured. Beginning evacuation procedures. Copy that, Alpha. Bravo Team, what's your status on the command deck? Deck secured, sir. We've got their captain and most of the senior officers contained. No casualties on our side. Jelka pressed her ear to the container wall, straining to understand what she was hearing. The voices were calm, professional, reporting their progress like they were conducting a routine operation, instead of assaulting ships that outmassed their own vessels by 10 to 1. Then she heard something that made her crystalline heart race with impossible hope. This is Sergeant Martinez. We found the prisoners. Looks like about 40 crystal beings in this container, packed in like cargo. They're scared, but alive. Requesting immediate medical support. Medical team is en route, Sergeant. Get those people out of there. The container shook as something began working on the locking mechanism from outside. Jelka heard the high-pitched whine of cutting tools, followed by a metallic clang as the door fell away. Light flooded in, and with it came their rescuers. The first human through the door was a female, wearing armor that looked like it had been through dozens of battles. Her face was covered by a tactical helmet, but her movements spoke of professional competence and urgent concern. Behind her came more humans, their weapons ready but pointed away from the prisoners. Easy, folks, the lead human said, her voice gentle despite the ongoing battle raging through the ship. We're here to help. I'm Sergeant Martinez, Earth Defense Force. Can anyone understand me? Zelka stepped forward, her body glowing with the formal communication patterns of her people. I understand. I am Commander Zelka. These are my people. Are we truly being rescued? Sergeant Martinez removed her helmet, revealing a scarred but kind face. Yes, ma'am. You're safe now. Can you help me get your people moving? We need to evacuate this ship before the Vec figure out how to counterattack. What followed was unlike anything Jelka had ever experienced. The humans moved through the ship with deadly efficiency, but their primary concern wasn't destroying their enemies. It was saving the prisoners. Medical teams appeared as if from nowhere, treating injuries and providing emergency care to Corallians who had been injured during the initial capture. Engineers worked to restore life support systems that the Vec had minimized to save power. The humans fought like predators, but they protected their rescued charges like family. Jelka found herself following Sergeant Martinez through corridors that had become a battleground. Dead Vec lay scattered throughout the ship, but she noticed that many of the enemy soldiers were merely unconscious or restrained. The humans had weapons that could kill, but they were using non-lethal settings wherever possible. Why don't you simply destroy them? Jelka asked as they passed a group of Vec prisoners under guard. Martinez looked puzzled by the question. Because they're prisoners now. They get treated according to the Geneva Conventions and interstellar law, same as anyone else. There were those concepts again. Laws that apply to everyone, even enemies. Protection for prisoners. The idea that strength came with responsibility instead of just opportunity. They reached the ship's hangar bay, where human shuttles were loading refugees with assembly line efficiency. But this wasn't the cold processing that the VEC had used. Human medics checked each Corallian personally, making sure they were healthy enough for transport. Engineers had rigged emergency life support systems to ensure the crystalline beings would be comfortable during the journey to safety. Captain Sarah Chen was there, coordinating the evacuation with the same calm professionalism she had shown during the battle. She was younger than Jelka had expected, with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much combat. When she saw Jelka approaching, she broke off her conversation with her tactical officer. "Commander Jelka, I presume," Chen said. "I'm Sarah Chen, commanding the rescue force. Are all your people accounted for?" I think so," Jelka replied, still struggling to process what was happening. "Captain Chen, I must ask, how did you reach us so quickly? Our nearest allies are weeks away." Chen's expression grew grim. "We've been tracking VEC harvest operations for months. When we intercepted your distress call, Command made a decision. Sometimes you do the right thing, even when it's impossible. But your ships, the distance you must have traveled, we burned out half our engine cores getting here. Pushed our hyperdrives past every safety limit in the book. 3 of my ships are going to need complete engine replacements when we get back to port." Zelka stared at her in amazement. "You destroyed your own ships to save us? Why would you do such a thing?" Chen looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "Because someone called for help. Because you needed saving, and we were the only ones who could get here in time." She paused, then added, "Because that's what humans do." The evacuation continued around them with flawless precision. Zelka watched human soldiers carrying elderly Corallians to safety, their weapons slung and their hands gentle. She saw human medics working frantically to save a young researcher who had been injured during the initial capture, refusing to give up even when it became clear that the injury was beyond their ability to heal. Most remarkably of all, she saw human engineers sharing their emergency rations with hungry Corallians, even though they had no idea when they would be resupplied. "Captain," Jelka said quietly, "we have nothing to offer you in return. No payment, no territory, no resources. Why do you risk so much for strangers?" Chen was quiet for a long moment, watching her people work. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but absolutely certain. "Because someone has to," she said simply. "Because if we don't stand up for people who can't defend themselves, then what's the point of being strong? Because somewhere out there, other species are sending distress calls, and they deserve to know that someone will answer." As they boarded the last shuttle, Jelka looked back at the harvester ship. The VEC vessel was dead in space, its crew in custody, its weapons destroyed. But it hadn't been obliterated. The humans could have easily destroyed the entire harvester fleet, but instead they had chosen the much more difficult path of capturing the ships and saving the crews. Even their enemies were treated with a mercy that the VEC themselves had never shown. The shuttle lifted off, carrying them toward the human ships in safety. Through the viewport, Jelka could see the other harvester vessels, all of them disabled but intact. The humans had fought a perfect battle, achieving total victory while minimizing casualties on both sides. It was, she realized, the most human thing of all. They had found a way to win without becoming monsters. 3 days later, Jelka stood on the observation deck of the human flagship and watched her people board the transport ships that would take them home. The rescue had been perfect. Every single Corellian had been recovered alive and healthy. The humans had shared their medical supplies freely, their food, their water, even their clothing when the refugees needed it. They asked for nothing in return except the coordinates of safe worlds where the Corellians could be taken. Jelka had spent those 3 days learning about the species that had saved them, and what she discovered amazed her more than the rescue itself. The humans came from a single world called Earth, orbiting a star they called Sol. They were a young species, having achieved interstellar flight only 2 centuries ago. By galactic standards, they were infants, barely worthy of notice. Yet somehow, these infants had built a military force capable of crossing impossible distances to fight enemies they had never met. "Your people are remarkable," she said to Captain Chen, who stood beside her watching the evacuation. "But I still don't understand why you do this." Chen smiled, the expression softening her battle-worn features. "It's hard to explain to species that evolve differently. Humans are pack animals, Commander. We have an instinct to protect the members of our pack. But for us, the pack includes everyone who can't protect themselves. Even species you've never encountered before?" "Especially them," Chen replied. "Look, every species in the galaxy has had to evolve survival strategies. Some became predators, some became very good at hiding. Some formed alliances with stronger neighbors. Humans, we became good at fighting monsters. You make it sound like a conscious choice." "In a way, it was," Chen said. "When we first reached the stars, we found a galaxy full of predators and prey. We could have become predators ourselves. It would have been easier. But we decided that someone had to stand up for the prey. Someone had to be willing to fight the monsters, even if there was nothing to gain from it." "And you appointed yourselves to that role?" Chen's smile turned grim. Nobody else was doing it. The conversation was interrupted by Lieutenant Torres, Chen's communications officer. "Captain, we're receiving long-range transmissions, multiple distress calls from across the sector." Chen's expression immediately became businesslike. "How many?" 17 confirmed, ma'am. Vec raids, Kresh slavers, a few unknown hostiles. The closest is in the Meridian system, about 6 hours away at maximum hyperspace." Zhao Kao watched Chen's face as she processed this information. The human captain was clearly exhausted. Her ships were damaged, her crews were tired, and several of her vessels were operating on backup systems. The sensible thing would be to return to human space for repairs and resupply. Instead, Chen nodded decisively. "Plot courses to all 17 systems. We'll take them in order of urgency. Have the repair teams prioritize engine fixes and weapon systems." "Ma'am," Torres said carefully, "we're already operating beyond recommended mission parameters. Command will understand if we return for refit. Command will also understand that people are dying while we debate mission parameters," Chen replied firmly. "We came out here to stop the raids. That job isn't finished." Zelka stared at her in amazement. "You're going to respond to all of them? 17 separate rescue operations?" "That's the plan," Chen confirmed. "We'll keep going until we run out of ships or targets. Hopefully, the targets first." It was insane. It was tactically unsound. It was strategically impossible. And it was the most heroic thing Zhel Ka had ever heard. "Captain, may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course. Do you have children? Family waiting for you at home?" Chen's expression softened. "2 daughters. Twins, actually. They're starting university this year, studying xenobiology. They want to be first contact specialists. And you're willing to risk never seeing them again for people you don't even know?" Chen was quiet for a long moment, watching the last of the Corallian refugees board their transport. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I'm doing this so that my daughters will grow up in a galaxy where calling for help actually means something. Where being weak doesn't automatically make you prey. Where someone always answers when you're in trouble." She turned to face Zhel Ka directly. "Your people were explorers, weren't they? Scientists trying to understand the universe." "Yes." "Then you understand. You spent your lives asking questions about how things work, why things happen, what's possible. My daughters are going to spend their lives meeting new species, learning about different cultures, exploring worlds we've never seen. I want them to do that in a galaxy where curiosity is rewarded, not punished, where peaceful species can exist without fear. Jelka felt her crystalline heart swell with understanding. So you fight for the future? For a better future, Chen corrected. One where strength is used to protect instead of exploit. Where being different doesn't make you a target. Where everyone gets a chance to grow and learn and contribute something good to the universe. The transport, carrying the Corallian refugees, began to pull away from the human flagship. Through the observation deck's windows, Jelka could see her people looking back at the ships that had saved them. Many of them were glowing with the light patterns that indicated formal gratitude among her species. They'll remember this, Jelka said. They'll remember that when no one else would come, the humans came. When no one else would fight, the humans fought. They'll tell their children, and their children will tell their children. Good, Chen replied. Maybe someday those children will grow up to help someone else who needs it. As the human fleet prepared to depart for the next crisis, Jelka made a decision that would change her life forever. Captain Chen, I want to join you. Chen looked surprised. Join us, Commander. You're a scientist, not a soldier. I'm someone who knows what it feels like to send a distress call into the void and hope someone will answer, Jelka replied. I know what it means to watch your people being loaded into cargo containers like animals. And I know what it feels like when someone actually comes to help. She gestured toward the human ships, where crews were working frantically to repair damage and prepare for the next mission. You can't do this alone. 17 rescue operations with 12 damaged ships? You need help. You need people who understand the species you're trying to save, who can translate and negotiate and explain what you're doing. Chen considered this carefully. It would be dangerous. We don't know what we're going to find out there. I don't care about the danger, Jelka said firmly. I care about making sure that when my daughters send out a distress call, someone like you will be there to answer it. Chen smiled and extended her hand in the human gesture of agreement. Welcome to the Earth Defense Force, Commander Jelka. I have a feeling we're going to need all the help we can get. As the human fleet jumped to hyperspace, heading toward the next crisis and the next desperate call for help, Jelka understood that she had witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. The humans hadn't come to their sector to establish territory or gain resources or build an empire. They had come to change the fundamental rules of how the galaxy worked. They were spreading across space like wildfire, turning the ancient law of survival of the fittest into something unthinkable, survival of everyone. And they were just getting started. In the depths of space, 17 different species were about to learn what the Corallians now knew. When you called for help, the humans would come. Always.